So today is probably my favorite topic of this entire series because, well, it applies to me very much. Today we're going to be talking about singleness being a gift. Now, even though I'm going to be talking to singles and about singles, the principles that we're going to discuss, the points that you are going to fill out in your little fill-in-the-blank stuff, is applicable all across the board. Because, and I'm probably going to give away the entire sermon right now to where I don't have to preach an hour like I did last week. But the reason singles have a hard time being content with being single is because we don't know who we are without our spouse. We have an identity crisis. Because our culture and our world and our friends expect us and desire for us to be married, and we can't have happiness until we have that spouse. And so it all comes down to our identity and who we are. And so today, as I start off, I would like to share with you a story that it is a true story, but it's a story that I have not told very many people. The only person who knows this story is Mike. Before that, it was Bill. They were so out of all the people that you know, they were the only two individuals that know this story. And I don't share it very often because of how it ends. I'm a bit embarrassed with how it ends. But what many of you don't know is that I was actually once engaged to get married. All right, and I met this girl. We were in school together, and we became friends, and we started just hanging out all the time together. You know, we would do the typical dating stuff where we would hold hands and, you know, laugh in each other's ear and, you know, all the lame couple stuff that we didn't have Facebook to share, so we had to share actually with each other. But a friendship grew, and then desire within both of our hearts, and a love grew between us. And so I asked her out, and she said yes. And so we dated for a while, and we got close, and we got to know each other even more, got to know each other's parents. And there was just something very special about this girl. And so I was talking with our mutual friends, my buddies, and I mentioned to them, I said, I think I want to marry this girl. And they're like, dude, are you serious? I was like, yes, I'm full-blown serious. I'm madly in love with this girl, and I just want to be with her for the rest of my life. And so they were like, all right, how are we doing this? And so my buddies and I actually sat down, and we came up with the engagement scenario. And so how we were going to do it, we were going to go back to the playground where we first met as a group of friends, and we were going to, you know, reminisce, laugh, and I was going to do it right there on the playground where we met. So we had this all planned out. We all met at the school, and we were laughing, and we were joking. And as her back was turned, I clapped, and my buddy tossed me the ring, and I got down on one knee, and as she turned around, I was on one knee. And I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. And so I know, I am a romantic, what can I say? And so we were engaged, and the planning process was super easy. Like, we agreed on everything, the date, the who was going to officiate the wedding, who was going to be our bridal party. It was just super easy. And so we were, you know, preparing for our wedding day. And then this is where it gets bad. A new girl moved into town, and she caught my eye. And so I started talking with her while still being engaged to this other girl. And so as the relationship between me and this new girl progressed, I ended up breaking off my engagement and going with the new girl. The moral of the story is third grade relationships are tough. That is right. I was engaged in third grade with a girl that I met on the playground, and the new girl moved into town, and, just how every relationship in third grade happens, you go to the next new thing. But marriage was something that was instilled in me from a very early age, and a desire that was in my heart, and it's still in there. I still have a desire to get married, and hopefully one day actually legit propose to a girl and get married, not back in third grade, which, by the way, the ring was a little ring that I won out of one of those little quarter things. That turns your finger green. So, high roller. All right, but anyways, I knew from an early age that I wanted to get married and that I still want to get married. I'm 31 now. I'm doing what I love. I love doing ministry. I love spending time with you, and I love the freedom that my singleness has given me to put my all in ministry. But there's still a desire there. There's still a desire to get married. You see, one day, I want to get married. I want to buy a house with my spouse. I want to have kids, and I want to have a dog. Okay, I really want to have a dog. And to get a dog, I got to get a wife. I can share you with that process after church, but I have an entire process that has to work out just so I can get a dog. But something that I had to realize as being a single male at 31 is I had to learn to be content in my circumstance. See, even though I desire to be married, is that my ultimate desire that consumes every ounce of my life? No. Do I think less of myself because I'm single? No. Do I struggle with my identity? No. And the reason I can say that is because I have found who I am in Christ. I found my identity in Christ, and I found my purpose and my gift in being single. Paul tells us in Philippians 4:11, "Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content." Now, Paul is talking here about the items that he has, as well as the spiritual nature that he has, or the spiritual relationship that he has with God. And he is saying, I have all that I need. I have what it's going to take to do this ministry. I have what it's going to take to live this life. I am content in everything. However, that is not the case for most individuals in Paul's position as well as my position. You see, for those who long for marriage, singleness can be a huge letdown. For those who long to be married, singleness can be a letdown. You see, it is no secret that there are many Christians who struggle with the idea of being content while single. We are part of a culture that demands that we have someone in our life, that we love someone and someone else loves us, and if someone else doesn't love us, then we are not truly products of society, or we don't really belong in the culture. And so many young Christians have found themselves in emotional turmoil due to spending so much time hoping and praying for a spouse, thinking that life doesn't start until you are married. And it only becomes worse when we get on social media and we scroll through and we see all of our friends who are getting married. We see all of our friends that we grew up with having kids. We see the students that we taught getting married and having kids, and you're still here single. And we allow that stuff to get into our minds, to warp our views, and to feel like we aren't worthy enough to be in this world. We view our singleness as a letdown. And the reason we view our singleness as a letdown is because we get trapped by the false notion that you have to be married to be happy. You see, the trap is that we have turned marriage into an idol. We have turned marriage into an idol. You see, it is very easy for Christians to take something that God has given as a gift to us, and whenever man gets a hold of it, we screw it up. You see, for any of us, whatever is our idol, whatever it is that thing that we desire the most, and we will do whatever it takes to get it, When we don't get it or when we don't receive it in the time that we want, we get very upset. We get very discouraged. Why? Well, it's because we have put all of our focus and made marriage the pedestal instead of God as the pedestal. But that even happens in marriage. All right, your spouse can become an idol. The reason why a lot of people have some resentment towards their spouse is because you have put your spouse where God's supposed to be. You have put your spouse as an idol. And when that imperfect person messes up or lets you down or breaks a promise, it shatters you. You see, the trap that we have is we either put our spouse as an idol or we put marriage as an idol. And when we do that and we don't get it, it's a letdown. And it distracts us from the mission that God has given us. There's a statistic that I want to share with you about texting. The U.S. Department of Transportation reported that cell phone use while driving kills 3,000 to 6,000 people every year. Texting while driving is a contributing cause in 25% of all car accidents, resulting in almost 400,000 physical injuries. Texting while driving causes 5 times as many accidents than drunk driving. Because the use of smartphones and texting are so prevalent, some states have prohibited texting and even the use of the phone while driving. You see, the risk caused by the distraction is too costly to allow. And in the same way, living as a single who is fixated on becoming married can also be detrimentally distracting. Although singles can be honest with God and honest with themselves, when we are distracted because we have this desire that might happen or might not happen, we lose sight of what really matters. We lose sight of what God has called every single one of us for. And I'm not only talking to singles here. We can make anything a distraction. That is why we got to keep our focus on Christ. We got to keep our focus on God. And we need to keep our focus on the plan and the purpose that He has for us. But how can we say along with Paul that we need to be content in all things if what I desire isn't coming? Now, for the past 3 weeks, we've discussed what it takes to have a lasting marriage, a lasting and strong and a Jesus-centered marriage. And as we have learned, marriage and partnership is a good thing to be desired. However, it doesn't have to be desired above all, because God has a purpose for everyone in every season of life, including singles. You see, Paul in 1 Corinthians 7:7 states, each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another, meaning that some will be called to marriage and others will be called to remain single. And what Paul shares with us throughout chapter 7 is that one is not holier than the other. Just because you are married does not mean you are better than someone who is single, and vice versa. We all have a purpose in this life. And the problem the church faced back in Corinth when Paul wrote this is the church faced then and also the church faces now is that we've created a divide and the stigma that married people are not able to relate to us singles, and singles are not able to relate to married people. You see, there is this divide in the church where a single cannot tell another married couple how to live a godly marriage because you have zero experience, and the singles say to the married people, don't tell me to be content in my singleness because you have already found your spouse. You've already found that person. You don't know what it's like to be this age and still be single. And there's this divide that has been caused in the church. And you might not vocalize it to each other, but that's going on in the minds. And you see, this divide is so relevant and so much in our face that even a marriage series becomes a taboo topic. You see, we all have a purpose. And Paul has to address this divide in Corinth. Because there is a divide between you have to be married, or if you are married, it is sinful, or if you are single, you are not useful for ministry. And so Paul has to take time and address this situation. And honestly, this divide should not be that way. In the ESV study Bible of this section, it says this: historically, the church has seen marriage as an earthly vocation, as it is a visible sign of the union between Christ and the church, the bridegroom and bride. Singleness, however, was viewed as a spiritual vocation, as it emphasized a forward look toward the coming bridegroom and served as a visible testimony to the sufficiency of Christ in all things. And so, church, my question for you is, what is marriage? What? An earthly vocation. Awesome. Good job, Mike. Way to go. The answer's up there, y'all. All right. And what is singleness? All right. What two words are repeated? You see, God uses both single and married people for His glory. God uses both single people and married people for His glory. And we need to embrace that truth. We need to embrace that in our life. Because we need to understand, we're not living for ourselves. Do we understand that? We're living for the glory of God in singleness and in our marriage. Now, we are going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, starting in verse 32. And this is towards the end of the entire marriage and singleness chapter of chapter 7 in 1 Corinthians. But this is what we read beginning in verse 32. I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife. And his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. If anyone thinks that he is not behaving properly toward his betrothed, if this passions are strong, and it has to be, let him do as he wishes. Let them marry. It is no sin. But whoever is firmly established in his heart, being under no necessity, but having his desire under control, and has determined this in his heart to keep her as his betrothed, he will do well. So then he who marries his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do even better. Now, Bill likes to quote those verses to me whenever I talk about being single. He's like, Paul says it's more blessed to be single. And I was like, can we finish that section, please? Okay, can we just finish that? Because that's why I can't remain single. All right, and then he laughs and and I'm like, go to Illinois. But in this section, Paul compares the married life and the unmarried life. And he compares them with the anxieties that go on in both. You see, when you are single, we have the ability to only worry about what is going to glorify God. We don't have to worry about another person. We don't have to worry about another spouse. We don't have to worry about kids. We just worry about me, myself, and I, and make sure that we are doing the work of God. All right? One of the reasons why I have yet to have a date or have a girlfriend is because I have to analyze everything. The question I have to say to myself is this person going to help me in my ministry, or is this person not going to help me in my ministry? And what I mean by that, and before you jump all over the place, I'm not planning on leaving, but if God ever calls me away, that person has to be able to come with me. But if I'm single, I don't have to worry about that. If God calls me to the mission field, I don't have to go and ask someone else's permission to make sure that individual is provided for and taken care of. I can just go where God calls me to go. Whereas a married couple has to think about who's going to take care of my spouse. Can we do this financially? Who's going to look after the kids? And so that is what Paul is sharing here, is that singleness doesn't have to worry about those things, whereas a married person has to. And so a single person can do the will of God freely. Now, this doesn't mean that married people can't do ministry and that married people are not useful for ministry. It's just your vocation is going to change. How you do it is going to change. So I'm not up here to say that married people are less, and I'm not up here to say single people are better. The reality is we just have a freedom that married couples don't have. You see, we don't lose our individuality in marriage just because we become one with another person. But the two relationship statuses mark a stark contrast in priorities. There will always be things that married couples can do that glorify God, serve His people, and help us grow in Christ. But married people have to take their spouse, children, finances, and obligations into consideration on a regular basis. You see, in verse 32 and 35, Paul offers all of us, no matter if we are married or single, crucial guidance that as Christians we should make decisions in light of which state, single or married, they can best serve the Lord. So what that is saying is figure out, if you're married, figure out how you and your spouse can best serve the Lord and do that. If you're single, figure out how you can best serve the Lord and do that. All right, that's what Paul is getting at here. That's what Paul is giving at here. And Paul gives specific direction to remain single, especially with the understanding that singleness in Christ means not having sex, which is completely countercultural because it is very difficult to live an abstinent life when it is everywhere around us and we are being pressured by culture, pressured by media, pressured by our friends. How can anybody who is single refrain from that temptation, from that struggle? You see, Paul knew the culture and he knew reality. Paul knew the power of a sexual drive in individuals, and in verse 36 he shares, if you cannot behave properly in normal terms, if you cannot refrain from having sex, get married. And that's what I always tell Bill to restate. Okay? Don't just say, it's more nice to be single. Okay, yeah, I know. There it is. Okay? That's why I can't. All right, you see, it is not a sin to be married, and it is not a sin to be single. If either of those will cause you to sin, don't do it. That's what Paul's getting at here. And I like what Paul says in verse 38. So then he who marries his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do even better. Whenever I read this section, I feel like Paul is just annoyed that he even has to address this. Because it's like, why? Why are we divided over this concept? Okay? If you're married, woohoo! Yay! If you're single, woohoo! All right? Rejoice in it. Okay? Live the dream. Live the life. Each is beneficial to each other. All right? Why do I have to address this? You should already know. Okay? Married person, you can still do God's work. Single person, you can do God's work. Woohoo! All right? Let's stop being divided over this. You see, God can use both single and married people for His glory, but it is better to be single because your devotion is not split. You see, Paul is not saying that one is better than the other. What Paul is identifying for us is that singleness is a gift, and we must honor it the same as marriage. Singleness is a gift, and we must honor it the same as marriage. We shouldn't look down on single people because they're not in our stage of life. They're not married. And singles should not look down on married people or be angry with married people because we can't be content with our current state of life. We can either, one, be bitter and resent this life, or we can embrace this life. I could stand up here and bash every single married person and say, how dare you be married and I'm not. I could sit in my office and complain to Mike, which I sometimes do, about being single. Or I can embrace the gift that God has given me and actually be an impact for this culture. You see, when we wallow in our own limits and our own disgust, when we wallow in what we don't have, we allow that to keep us from glorifying God. We allow those things to keep us from living the life that God has called us for, a bountiful life. So singles, we need to stop wallowing in our singleness. And we need to see the gift that God has given us that we can use. One day, yeah, you might be married. And when I talk about singles, like Paul is not foreign to the single life, because Paul himself was single. Jesus, our Savior, was single. They were both content in their singleness. Why can't we, as singles, be content in our singleness? Why can't we? In this section, Paul affirms the different callings that the Lord places on each of our lives, arguing that each has its own gift from God. One person has this gift and another has that. And as followers of Christ, we must appreciate and honor the unmarried members of our church communities as well as the married people of our communities, thanking God for their service and the dedication to Him. So married people, let me ask you this. Have you ever said to a single person, when are you going to get married? Or have you ever said, hey, you're running out of time? All right, or maybe have you ever tried to play matchmaker? And sometimes your single friends might appreciate the fact that you're playing matchmaker. Other times your single friends might be like, please don't. I don't know. When I was back home for my Grammy's funeral, my dad's side of the family bombarded me with those questions. Like, why are you still single? All right? You're running out of time. I'm like, I'm 31. Back off. Okay? You know, and I had to hear that. And, of course, it's like, and you just kind of walk away. But you see, married people, have you ever asked those questions to your single friends, thinking of what it might do to their heart? Thinking of what it might do to their conscience? And single people, do you allow those comments to get to you? Do you allow those comments to affect you? Are you content in your singleness? You see, a reality with singles is we definitely don't appreciate being treated like we matter less until we get married. You see, many married people and those in serious relationships want their single friends to be happy and have that beautiful feeling of having a family, but singleness does not mean family less. You see, everyone right now in this sanctuary who is a born-again Christian is part of a spiritual family. So let us help each other discover the gift God has given us and rejoice with each other. So how can we be content in our current stage of life? And this question goes to everybody. How can we be content in our current stage of life? Whether it is the stage of where we work. I am not content in my workplace. I am not content in my home. I am not content with this church. I am not content to be in this world. I'm just not content with being single. I am not content with my spouse. I am not content with fill in the blank. How can we be content? And I think the psalmist helps answer this for us in Psalm 145, verses 14 through 19, where he says, The Lord upholds all who fall and lifts up all who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food at the proper time. You open your hand and satisfy the desires of every living thing. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and faithful in all he does. The Lord is near to all who call on him, and to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desires of those who fear him. And he hears their cry, and he saves them. You see, the psalmist identifies for us the heart of God to fulfill the needs and the desires of those who love him. And so we need to take hope and take our foundation into these truths that are revealed in Psalm 145, 14 through 19. And these are the truths. God gives us what we need at the proper time. So I'm going to remain single at the age of 31 until at the proper time God brings me my spouse. You see, we don't like to wait on God's timing because we think our timing is perfect and we would like God to hurry it up. But God's timing is perfect, and he will give you what you need at the proper time. We need to learn how to be content until that happens. And at the proper time, God will open his hand and he will satisfy our needs. All right, at the proper time, he will open his hand and say, all right, you can have this now. All right, you can do this now. All right, you can fill in the blank. And then we read that God will fulfill the desires of those who fear him, of those who revere him, of those who worship him, of those who love him. We read in Matthew where Jesus shares about don't have any anxieties about anything. Don't you know that the birds of the air get fed? Who do you think feeds the birds? God does. The ground gets dew on it. Who do you think puts the dew on the ground? God does. If God cares about the birds and if God cares about the grass, imagine how much he cares about you. Imagine how much he will provide for your needs, for those who fear him. And so the challenge I have for all of us is to quit resenting your life and embrace the life that God has for you. Quit resenting your life and embrace the life that God has for you. Quit resenting what you don't have and rejoice in what you do have. Quit making the desires of your life an idol where you are distracted from what truly matters. See, for those who desire to be married, waiting for that longing to be fulfilled and not knowing whether it will be fulfilled is going to be especially hard. And singles who desire to be married can keep their hope fixed on God and his character, pressing on to engage with God and God's people while they hope for their longings to possibly be fulfilled, whether or not that fulfillment comes about by means of marriage. See, the challenge here, church, is that we must trust God with his plans for our lives and set our hope on him, not on marriage, not on dating, and not on our spouse. All right, the whole reason for this Till Death Do Us Part series and the culmination is, where is your identity? Is your identity in your marriage? Is your identity in your spouse? Is your identity in the desires that are not being fulfilled? Or is your identity in God? Who does God say that you are? God says that you are a child of his. And God is saying, let me take care of you. Let me fulfill your desires in my timing. Trust my timing. Trust that I know what's best for you. It takes trust. It takes putting our faith and our hope and our identity in God. That is how we become content in all things. We focus on God and not ourselves.